The roles and powers of the President fall under the broader topic of the executive branch in the U.S. government. The President's powers come from Article 2 of the U.S. Constitution, historical precedent, and congressional delegation. Here is a breakdown of the President's formal and informal roles and powers. These are the powers explicitly listed in Article 2 of the Constitution. As Chief Executive, the President enforces laws passed by Congress, appoints cabinet members, agency heads and judges with Senate approval, issues executive orders which have the force of law, grants pardons and reprieves for federal offences, and oversees the federal bureaucracy, including agencies like the FBI, EPA and CIA. As Commander-in-Chief, the President leads the U.S. military, which includes the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, Space Force and the National Guard when federalized. The President can deploy troops without congressional approval, although Congress declares war and commissions officers in the U.S. military. As the Chief Diplomat, the President negotiates treaties with foreign nations, though these treaties must be ratified by the Senate. The President also appoints ambassadors, again with Senate approval required. Additionally, the President recognizes foreign governments and uses executive agreements which do not require Senate approval. Moving on to the role of Chief Legislator, the President signs or vetoes bills, although Congress can override a veto with a two-thirds majority. The President delivers the State of the Union address, outlining legislative priorities, and proposes a legislative agenda, though Congress ultimately makes the laws. The President also uses the bully pulpit to push policies. As the Chief of State, the President represents the nation both at home and abroad. The President performs ceremonial duties such as lighting the national Christmas tree and throwing the first pitch at baseball games. Additionally, the President attends state funerals and major events. In the role of Chief Guardian of the Economy, which is not explicitly mentioned in the Constitution, the President proposes the federal budget, though Congress must approve it. The President influences economic policy in areas such as taxation, inflation and trade, and works with the Federal Reserve to manage monetary policy. Now, let's move on to an introduction to the President's informal powers. The President acts as the Chief Guardian of the Economy, a role not explicitly outlined in the Constitution. They propose the federal budget, although Congress must approve it. The President also influences economic policy, including taxation, inflation and trade. Additionally, they work with the Federal Reserve to manage monetary policy. Informal roles and powers of the President have evolved over time. These powers have developed through precedent, tradition, and congressional delegation. Executive orders are directives issued by the President that have the force of law, but do not require congressional approval. For example, the Emancipation Proclamation by Lincoln, Japanese internment by FDR, and DACA by Obama. Executive privilege is the right to withhold information from Congress, the courts, or the public for national security reasons. A notable example is U.S. v. Nixon in 1974, which limited executive privilege in criminal investigations. Executive agreements are agreements with foreign nations that do not require Senate approval, unlike treaties. For example, the Paris Climate Agreement and the Iran nuclear deal, both under President Obama. As the party leader, the President sets the policy agenda for their political party, supports candidates running for office, and raises funds for the party. Scene 5. Crisis Manager and Public Persuader. As crisis manager, the President is expected to lead in times of national crisis, such as wars, natural disasters, and terrorist attacks. For instance, President Bush's response to the 9/11 attacks and President Biden's response to the COVID-19 pandemic. As a public persuader, often referred to as using the bully pulpit, the President uses media and speeches to influence public opinion and legislative action. Examples include FDR's fireside chats, Reagan's skills as the great communicator, and Trump's use of Twitter. Despite these powers, the president faces several constitutional and political limitations. Scene 2. Congressional checks. Congressional checks. Impeachment and removal. The House impeaches and the Senate convicts. Override vetoes with a 2/3 vote in both chambers. Power of the purse. Congress controls federal funding. Senate confirmation power for appointments and treaties. Judicial checks. The Supreme Court can declare actions unconstitutional, for example, U.S. v. Nixon. Public opinion and media negative public perception or media criticism can limit presidential influence. Federalism states can resist federal executive actions, such as states refusing to enforce certain federal policies. Examples of presidential power in action. Chief Executive Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal policies reshaped government agencies. Commander-in-Chief Truman ordered the atomic bomb drop in World War II. Chief Diplomat Nixon's visit to China in 1972 helped normalize relations. Chief Legislator Lyndon B. Johnson's Great Society programs, including Medicare and the Civil Rights Act. Executive orders, Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation, Biden's COVID-19 mandates. Key Supreme Court cases related to presidential power. U.S. v. Nixon in 1974, which limited executive privilege. Youngstown Sheet and Tube, Co. v. Sawyer in 1952, which limited presidential power to seize industries. Clinton v. City of New York in 1998, which declared the line-item veto unconstitutional. Conclusion. The president wields significant power in both domestic and foreign affairs, but that power is checked by Congress, the courts, and public opinion. The balance between formal constitutional powers and informal, evolved powers shapes the effectiveness of each administration.